Alright, so we got a 205 C63 in. This one's in for electrodiagnosis and a transmission that's overheating. The hood switch, you did mention that the hood switch isn't working. I don't know what exactly about it, but whenever you're driving, it says that the hood is open when it's really not, so it has to be something electronically in these switches. Those are the three concerns on this that we're gonna figure out today. Okay, so just looking over everything in the engine bay for anything obvious or leaking. Don't really see anything. A couple missing screws. There's supposed to be a screw there holding that fuel line. There's supposed to be one here too. That's okay. The fan feels okay. And there's this coolant that's completely empty. And this is the coolant that circulates through the transmission cooler. And he has a transmission overheating issue. So I'll investigate the rest of that once it's in the air. The main coolant is a bit low, but I'll top that off a little bit. And this engine cover's missing all the grommets here. I'm gonna make a bit of a rattle when driving. And these are just the adapter harnesses to go to these intakes. Got the meth hookup lines. No, nothing leaking or nothing really of any major concern up top. Are you going?
You're going.
Okay. So this screw is loose. Oh, it was stripped out. Well, I tried. Okay, I'm just gonna take off a couple of these under shields so I can see everything under here. And then I'm gonna run fault codes and see what's going on with it, but just to see anything obvious, I know the coolant pump for the transmission cooler is over here, and also I can see all the coolant lines and see if there's anything restricted or broken. That one was loose too. There's a couple of these missing, but never mind, I'm gonna take this off. That's missing. You can see it's missing a thread there.
Right.
Okay, just to look for anything obvious. So here is actually one thing about this engine. That reservoir you saw up top in the engine bay, that's like a display reservoir to show if there's coolant in the system or not. And this is the secondary reservoir that holds about the same amount of volume you can see here. And it's also empty. There's a little pink hue to it, like a little puddle of coolant in there. That is also empty. So the secondary coolant system seems to be at least very low, if not empty. So I think there's going to be an obvious coolant leak somewhere. Or if it overheated to the point of like vaporized so much of the coolant, it evaporated out a large volume. But that seems unlikely. I might have to fill it up and see what's going on with it, unless I have an obvious fault code or something. This car had an overheating transmission issue once, but it was a broken coolant line. Usually you can see coolant residue like this. Here's coolant. Where does this connector go to too? It's very corroded. If you ever want to use that again, you'll probably have to replace the pins in that connector. A lot of corrosion on the electrical pins. Is this the front bumper connector? This might be the front bumper harness. But anyways, that connector is not really usable anymore. Okay, this coolant. We've also got the ambient air temperature sensor hanging down here, which can cause a lot of issues. It can heat soak and throw off a lot of stuff. The ECU actually takes this into account when it's doing calculations of like the outside air temperature. So it's important to have that in place. You can see it now sticking out on the front. Okay. So a lot of these AMGs will have a pack of radiators. You have the like AC condenser, the main radiator, an oil cooler, and then like another radiator. Sometimes it can be up to 5 different like radiator packs. Whenever you take them out, it's all in that huge unit. It has several tanks of fluid flowing through it. Some of the cars will even have transmission fluid flowing through one of these. So this seems to be a fluid leak from this middle radiator, which I believe serves as the cooler for the coolant that flows through the turbos and the transmission. They have their own cooling circuit. And if I'm not mistaken, this is the radiator in the middle that flows through that system. I'm going to double check with the coolant diagram though, and if that's true and that's coolant, then it's safe to say that's leaking. Also, this guy. Also, I see a little bit of residual oil on this line, which is AC. It's currently December, so it's hard to tell if that's working properly or not because we do not have the AC on. I see some oil dripping down the side of the engine here on the very bottom. It's gonna be hard to see with the camera, but it's way up there. Yep. So that is hard to say. It's not dripping off the engine or anything by any means. I'll recheck that once I get to the top. But it's not wet down here or nothing. Like, it's not dripping off. Nowhere nearly as bad as this leak, the rear main leak. That's like it has the whole undershield wet, like dripping with oil. This rear undershield's torn up pretty good. Missing a screw there. It's very oily too. The rear main seal plate. You can see how wet it is on that crack right there between the engine and transmission. It's the rear main seal plate. So you'll have to take the transmission and everything out to get to that and then replace it with a revised version. They have a different version seal plate that seals a lot better. Also, the oil separators on these engines, they are known to fail, causing like excessive vacuum in the crankcase, and it can pull the lip of the seal in and cause an oil leak like that too. So that may also be contributing to that issue, but they do have a revised version of that seal. So that is a one-time thing, and it should never happen again with the new style in it. All right, continuing on. The suspension, all the ball joints are good, not busted up. The suspension bushings are good. Those are ripped up. Brakes, they're about 20-30%. Definitely gonna need rotors. They're very lit. This is definitely at least the second set of pads on the same rotors. Yeah, outside pad is still about 20-30%. Can you see that in there? It's not thin enough to replace yet, but it's getting there. Probably another year on it, and definitely it'll need rotors with the next set of pads. Nail on the tire right there. We'll squirt something on that and see if it's leaking here. I don't see any bubbles coming out of it. If it's leaking, it'd be bubbling up around it because it's blowing air out minutely. So let's go ahead and take that out. So since the head of it is still intact, you can literally use a screwdriver on it. And if it's not leaking, you want to take it out because as your tire wears down, it's gonna, like as the tread wears, it's gonna push that further and further in and it will start leaking. So if it's not leaking now, go ahead and get it out. I'm just gonna make sure it's not nope, that's leaking. Yeah. Yep. We're just gonna twist that back into where it was and quote a patch. Okay, so that's why I always remove things slowly, because sometimes they can be sealed where they're at currently, but if you just jiggle it a little bit and let some air pass through the shaft of whatever is in there, in this case the screw, you can tell it's leaking by. So leave it in if it's not, and at least, you know, you can air the tire up and still use it. I can also see there's already a plug in this tire from a previous nail or something. And that looks like an actual plug too, which is great. I don't like the ones that you kind of push in from the outside. I always do a plug patch from the inside, and that'll hold up to anything and completely save the tire. So these are still pretty thick, and they're Michelin, what, Pilot Super Sports? I can tell it's been ran on flat. This might not be repairable. I guess I'd see if I got the tire off. Michelin Pilot Sport 4S's. Yeah, it might be worth repairing. We'll quote it for them. The suspension on this side, good. Bushings. None of them are busted. The upper ball joint, what's that one? Is good. The struts aren't leaking. The brakes about the same as the other side, maybe a little lower than the left side. This outside pad is good, thicker than the inside. This inside pad's a little lower. Anyway, they do have sensors on them, so they will go off if they're at like a dangerous level, but just something to keep in mind for probably around the next service time or a year or so. All the suspension looks okay though. Okay, so nothing on the back of the heads. All that looks good. This wiring harness isn't clipped in where it's supposed to be. Can you see that? Okay, that's in place. The back of the engine looks okay. The oil cooler up there isn't leaking, which is common on these engines. Yeah, that's not leaking. Okay. All right, side of the transmission looks good. Let me see this side. Yes, nothing there, nothing there. Transmission mount. I can feel it more than I can see these. I know the way they're supposed to feel. That one's good, very high, not collapsed or anything. The mounts are good. This front drive shaft flex disc is good. That valve is rattling a little bit. Drive shaft. Okay, this rear flex disc is okay. No deep tears or anything in that. And then the rear axles, both the boots look good, not leaking. These bushings here are good. That's not clipped in, right? These bushings look good. The strut's not leaking. All the suspension bushings, good. This one's good. This one's good. Good. No tears anywhere. Strut's not leaking. Brake fluid. And the rear brakes. The rear brakes are low. That's 10 to 15% life, I would say. I'm surprised that's not triggering the warning. Oh yeah, that's very low. These tires are new. Yep, these are the same way. Outside pad, very low. How is this not triggering this? Where's the sensor? On this one? Sensor's on the outside pad of... This has to be on the verge. No, that should definitely be triggering. If not, it's right on the verge. That's going to be triggering anytime. That pad's very low. I wonder if the sensor's plugged in correctly, because that should be triggering. But anyways, yeah, so in summary for the inspection, the rear main seal leak. If he wants to replace any of this, I'll probably ask first to see if he wants any of this quoted or if he wants any of this done, and if so, I'll quote it up for him. I do work on this car frequently, and I may have quoted this stuff before in the past as well, and he does a lot of work on his own car, so he might want to do half this stuff himself, but I'll see what all he wants to do. So it's a rear main engine oil leak, the rear engine cover, rear brakes, leaking tire. That was it, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. That was it. Okay, so now on to the electrical issue and the transmission overheating issue. Just got the test back. We don't have our Mercedes-Benz diagnostic computer yet. It's still on the way from Germany, so I don't know how long that's going to be. So this is what I have now, the Autel MS909. It has 177 fault codes in the whole car. These are all the individual computers in the car. And everything in orange has a fault code, at least one. Some have several. On the assumption this is gonna leak. We'll put that right there. Completely unrelated, but just topping this off because it's a little low. So this is the cooling circuit that is supposedly leaking, but we'll see. It's probably going to drink quite a bit. It's recording. Okay, so just found the leak visibly. I found it before it started dripping all over the floor, thankfully. And it's right there. You can see coolant flowing out of it ever so slowly, and it's going to start dripping here in just a minute, but that's where it is. A pretty big rock hit right there. You can see that dent is substantially larger than all the other ones. And the Mercedes metal is very susceptible to that kind of stuff. I've had some cars where I've replaced the side radiator multiple times on cars before. And they do have grill guards for these because it's a known problem, and you can see how torn up this one is, but yeah, it is a very common problem with the soft aluminum material these are made out of. It doesn't take much to pierce through them. So with the hood issue, with the light being on, I found that this hood hinge sensor is disconnected. Like, it's not, the connector's not in it at all, but I found the connector, so that's good. I'm just trying to fish it out and untangle it through the wiring harness to get it back to where it can reach this and plug it in for them. Here it is. It's not plugged in. So then we fish it over here. Very nice. So that is 2 issues down and just 1 to go, being the electrical issue. Okay, so just got to the bottom of the electrical issue on the C63. This is actually day number 2. I've been working on it all day and the majority yesterday. Trying to figure this out, trying to like read wiring diagrams and looking up like the CAN interfaces, the way each CAN network will communicate with each other, seeing like which gateway is in control of which networks and how all the control units talk to each other and everything. Because it was pretty hard to try to piece together what fault codes I had with what's going on. The issue is it only occurs like a couple seconds every like 20 or so minutes you drive the car. So all you have to go off of is what you see for those couple seconds and the fault codes it leaves afterwards. So basically the one of the CAN buses was going offline completely. It was that one. This is the CAN block with all the connectors on it. Each one of those individual connectors right there, the brown ones, each one of those goes to a different computer somewhere in the car. And so one of those computers was responsible for corrupting the whole CAN bus, because one messes with it and it disrupts the entire signal for every single computer on that communication network. So basically just by trial and error, drove around, and as it would happen, I would unplug one and see what would happen. I tested as many as I could here in the shop to try to see if I could replicate the issue, but it's not a matter of like the control unit goes offline. It's that it puts like erratic data on the CAN bus and messes with everything. Because it'd be different if you could just simply unplug, like this is a member of that CAN bus, for example. So if you just unplug this, everything else would still work. I mean, not everything else would still work, but you would have fault codes for this. It'd be a totally different scenario than as this backfeeding out like irrational data to every other control unit. So you can't really duplicate it. So yeah, just by trial and error, I drove around and unplugged one at a time until I fixed the issue. So I did. I unplugged this, and that's what fixed it. I didn't know it was that at the time because they're all just blank brown connectors. None of them are labeled or anything. But once I got back here, I basically, judging by whenever I unplugged it, the screen went off. So once I unplugged the connector, once I got back here, then I unplugged this guy and confirmed I'm poking into the right wire, and then I was able to confirm that that connector goes to the head unit here. So then I was able to verify that this is the issue, something internal of here. I'm going to review the wiring diagram one more time to see if there's anything that could contribute to that. I really don't think there is, because the processor in here is what's responsible for CAN communication. I just have seen on other things, mainly draw tests, doing stuff that like a sensor could backfeed into a control unit, keeping the control unit awake, causing something like that. I don't think that's possible, but this is very expensive, so I just want to make sure I can absolutely conclude that this unit is the issue. So once I'll confirm that, what I'm 99% sure now, I'm just going to look over everything and make sure I'm not missing anything. I did test the wires to make sure they're not grounding out on each other or anything in the chassis. And the signal's good. The wires are both good. Very low resistance on each wire. So it's just a data issue that can't really be fixed other than replacement of the head unit. So we'll get one of those quoted for him and see what he wants to do about that. So the intermittent electrical issue ended up being that head unit. I was able to confirm that. Once you unplug it, it of course doesn't work and everything it controls, but all the other 8 control units on that entire communication network are able to work again. You can basically think of it like there's 9 control units and they all communicate over 2 wires. These 2 wires go to every single computer on that entire network. And so it's like all of these 9 computers are in like a group chat and one of them's screaming so loud, all the other ones can't hear each other. So once you disconnect that one, it of course doesn't work, but everything else is able to talk to each other. So that's how I was able to confirm that it's the head unit. So it'll need a head unit replacement and a auxiliary radiator is what they call it, replacement, to fix both those issues. So we'll get those quoted out to him and see what he wants to do.